It's an enduring facet of human nature, the drive to explore the unknown. But intrepid adventurers also prepare for adversity. Some train for years before braving the tallest mountain ranges, the deepest oceans, the farthest reaches of space. There's no doubt that exploration can be as terrifying as it is exhilarating. But picture yourself participating in a seemingly innocuous activity, an evening's fun with friends, before making one catastrophic error of judgment, leaving you trapped and balancing precariously on the brink of death for a horrifying 28 hours. This is the story of John Jones and the Nutty Putty Cave incident. John Edward Jones was a 26-year-old man of adventure, a father and husband, who spent nearly every weekend exploring the outdoors. John attended medical school and was working towards becoming a pediatric cardiologist, so his free time was limited and cherished. He grew up exploring caves and undiscovered areas with his father and siblings. He even volunteered to act as a trapped victim for the Utah Caves Rescue, an organization founded by his father, which helped train novice explorers to find their way out of difficult situations. In late November of 2009, John, his wife Emily, and their 13-month-old daughter Lizzie traveled to Utah to stay with his family for a few days before Thanksgiving. Shortly after their arrival, they shared the happy news that Emily was expecting their second child. John was from a large family. He had 6 siblings, most as adventurous and sporty as he was. He made plans for the next few days, including a visit to explore the nearby Nutty Putty Caves with his brother Josh. These caves attracted between 5,000 and 10,000 visitors a year, and despite the fact that the passages were notoriously tight spaces full of hard-to-navigate crevices, they were classed as suitable for beginners to explore. Located 55 miles south of Salt Lake City in Utah, the hilltop entrance to the Nutty Putty Cave was first discovered in 1960, and the underground caverns quickly became known for their narrow and slippery passageways with twists, turns, and squeezes. The layout was mapped and named accordingly, with areas marked the Birth Canal, the Aorta Crawl, the Scout Eater, and the Maze. The charted areas of the cave extended 100 feet below the Earth's surface and spanned over 1,300 feet in length. Around 7 p.m. on the 24th of November, John, his brother Josh, and a small group of friends arrived at the entrance to the cave. It had been some time since John had ventured into a cave, and at 6 feet tall and weighing roughly 200 pounds, from a practical point of view, he no longer had the streamlined height and build advantage he'd taken for granted as a boy. The group descended into the darkness and began to explore. The more experienced members, including the brothers, headed towards an area named the Big Slide, while the others remained close to the entrance. John started slowly, feeling his way and allowing himself to become accustomed to the atmosphere and surroundings of the cave. However, within an hour, and feeling more confident, he studied the map and, with Josh right behind him, decided to move to a more challenging area known as the Birth Canal. As the name implies, the tunnel is extremely confined and narrows significantly before widening back out into another series of chambers. 10 years prior, in 1999, 2 teenage boys had become stuck in this area and were recovered by a team in a 10-hour rescue operation. Similarly, in 2001, a couple of Boy Scouts got into difficulties in the same stretch, becoming trapped before county rescue were able to extract them after a grueling 4-hour mission. Leading the way, John turned into what he believed to be the entrance to the Birth Canal and crawled forward, inching headfirst along a narrow tunnel. But, in fact, he'd taken a wrong turn and was in a completely different area of the cave. As he continued along an upward incline, the walls pressed in from all sides, becoming narrower and narrower until he could go no further. Looking ahead, he saw the passage drop sharply and then appear to widen. Believing this to be the only possible way he could turn around, John mustered all his strength, exhaled, and squeezed his ribcage over a lip of rock jutting out of the floor. He drew breath and wriggled forward a couple of inches before realizing that he had now become completely stuck. The panic-inducing reality was that John had crawled into an unmapped area and wedged himself tightly into a 10 by 18-inch fissure that dropped straight down to nothing. Josh, who had been several meters behind his brother, heard him call out and managed to wriggle up alongside his feet. He attempted to help by pulling at John's legs, but in fact, this only made matters worse as he slipped down further into the chasm, ending up headfirst at a 70-degree angle with one arm by his side and the other pinned underneath him, unable to move at all. Recognizing that they needed urgent help, Josh left John with a friend and rushed back to the cave entrance. He had to climb right up and back out onto the hilltop in order to call for assistance. Having raised the alarm, Josh returned to John, but it was an agonizing 3-hour wait until somebody arrived. At 12:30 a.m., local rescue volunteer Susie Matola was the first to arrive on the scene. When she reached John and saw how dire the situation was, her first instinct was to keep him as calm as possible. She told him not to worry and that she would do everything she could to free him as soon as possible, to which he replied, "Hi, Susie. Thanks for coming, but I really, really want to get out." After 2 hours, she had tried everything she could think of, including cutting away material from his jeans to try and leverage some more space, but nothing had worked. Exhausted, she crawled back to the surface and found that a rescue team of around 30 people had arrived. John's wife, Emily, their daughter, and anxious family members had also gathered to help. The group made various suggestions, including whether they would be able to chip away at the tunnel or lubricate the walls somehow, but eventually decided that the best course of action would be to install a system of ropes and pulleys. Painstakingly, the equipment required was carried down into the cave. In order to free up the space needed to install the pulley, rescuers tried drilling away chunks of rock near John, but the hard material and the awkward position made the drilling slow and painful work. In over an hour, they had only managed to drill through a couple of inches of rock. Back at the surface, the authorities were growing extremely concerned about how slowly the rescue effort was progressing. Every time the team needed a piece of equipment, somebody had to deliver it 700 feet underground, crawling slowly on their belly to John's location. Each trip took the best part of an hour, and the passageway to John was so narrow that only one person could crawl in or out at a time. Of even greater concern was the position that John had become stuck in. Dr. Douglas Murdoch, the emergency physician on site, cautioned that time was really of the essence if they were to save him. John's body was upside down, inverted at around a 70-degree angle, and because of this, there was an immense pressure on his organs. When the human body is suspended upside down, the organs put extra weight on the lungs, making it harder to breathe. Heart problems can arise because there is a lot more blood flowing towards the heart, meaning it has to work against gravity and pump harder than usual. Blood and fluid may pool in the brain and lungs, and over time, there is an increased risk of cardiac failure. Murdoch estimated that the team would have roughly 10 hours before John's organs were likely to start failing. Down in the cave, the crew had successfully drilled and installed the rope and pulley system they hoped would be able to pull John out. But there were several potential problems. The bend in the tunnel would make it extremely difficult to pull John up and out without harming his legs. And then there was the lip of rock jutting out from the ground, which John had squeezed past. State Senator and volunteer rescue worker John Valentine said, "The lip basically captured the center part of his body, so that as you pulled against it, you were pulling as though against a fishhook. It would stand up just underneath the rib cage in the narrowest part of the cave." Increasingly, John had started to display signs of difficulty breathing, and as a consequence was swinging between moments of panic and then calmness. So before attempting to pull him out, the crew decided that he should be given a chance to speak with his wife. They brought down a two-way cable radio into the cave and managed to position it so he could talk to Emily, who was waiting at the surface. The couple spoke only briefly, but were able to provide some comfort to one another. At this point, John had been trapped upside down for 18 hours, and time was running out. A team of 8 had assembled and were ready to begin pulling. They made little progress at first, because every movement was excruciating for John. As his boots caught against the ceiling, he cried out in pain, and they were forced to stop. However, on the third pull, miraculously it seemed as though the tables were turning. They'd hoisted him up into a much better position, and for the first time, been able to make eye contact with him. The rescuer closest said that John looked tired, his eyes were red and his face dirty, but he still managed to smile. And then, disaster struck. The team were braced, preparing to pull for the 4th time, when the rope suddenly went slack in their hands, sending them all toppling backwards. The foremost rescuer felt something hard strike his face, and he lost consciousness for a moment. When he came to, and the dust had settled a bit, he realized the stone arch near John's legs where the rope was anchored had shattered, and the nearest key bolt had broken off. He couldn't see in the dust exactly where John was, but it soon became clear. He had slipped right down into the crevice again, and worse still, was now completely unresponsive. There were barely any options left. The injured rescuer was forced to retire, and his replacement managed to wriggle halfway down into the crevice and secure a rope around John's waist. But in doing so, he too became stuck, and the team had great difficulty in pulling him back to safety. In a last-ditch attempt to make any difference, the team continued to drill into the walls of the tunnel, but it proved impossible to add any valuable advantage. Eventually, suspecting the worst, they brought down a paramedic who was able to crawl towards John and check for vital signs. Tragically, at just before midnight on November the 25th, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead, 28 hours after he had first become trapped. John's family were in shock and at first could not believe the news that John had passed away. A total of 137 rescuers had worked tirelessly for 26 hours to save him, but in the end, they'd had to abandon the undertaking without success. Officials reassured the family that they would do everything in their power to retrieve John's body, but even this would prove to be too difficult. For 2 days, the rescue teams attempted to free him using the same methods they'd practiced during the rescue, but to no avail. And the unpalatable truth was that even if they could somehow have released him, it would have been impossible for his body to be recovered intact. Ultimately, and with the family's blessing, authorities determined that it was just too dangerous to continue putting rescuers at risk and called a halt to the retrieval effort, deciding instead to leave John where he lay. 1 week later, a quantity of cement was poured into the entrance of the Nutty Putty Cave, and it was sealed shut, with John's body inside, forever. The family erected a plaque at the site in his memory, which reads, "On November the 25th, 2009, our beloved John passed away at this site. He was a loving father, a kind husband, a loyal son, and a true and cherished friend. Those who knew him best will remember his faith and caring heart. We miss you and love you always." To this day, John's remains are still inside the cave, and his story serves to highlight the very real dangers of cave exploration.